So as you can see that uh, the rural India is actually more at risk as compared to the urban area. This is what a simple data set can do to you, and this is what data journalism is, to find out what the data is saying to you. And you'll be surprised to know that sometimes your hypothesis will be as you had thought it to be, but at other times it will be totally opposite to what you had thought it to be. So like for example, Kerala was the first state to get the COVID uh, to get the COVID tested, and it was also the one of the first states to get uh, the bend to get the line bending. And so that is because their households are mostly 0 to 20% households have um, the people living in three or more in one room. So that is, these are some of the key insights and interesting insights, and this is why data journalism is important.
Thank you, Rangoli. Tanay, would you like to take that forward and probably tell us the relevance of data journalism, especially during the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. So, just for a background, I began this COVID thing started when I was working at Scroll, and there I was covering it as live blogs and daily reports. And this was very much like what I had been doing for 2.5 years. But one thing was very different. And what was it? That this time, the biggest story of the day and of the week of the century, it was all about data. I had not encountered this so far, where data is such an important part of the biggest story. And At this time I also joined Mint, where now I am leading the a daily tracker where we cover the trends of how the pandemic is progressing, how it is developing in different states, different countries. And this has been one observation, that data has all journalists have been thrown into data journalism unprepared. So I'll give you an example. Like initially, what was it? It was about 1,000 cases, then 2,000 cases, 5,000 cases. Now those are simple numbers, now everyone understands that. But how can you make sense of what is happening, what will happen, if you are not able to say think of what is the pace of it? Is it going faster now? Is it going slower now? Which state, in which state the pandemic is, the outbreak is increasing faster? Which country? Is India's number of cases rising faster or slower than other countries? When will the peak strike? All this is so much data. And even something like the lockdown, which impacted all of our lives, uh, did the lockdown work? So that is something where you need the data to understand whether it worked or not. So this is what my observation was. Like this, you just can't escape data. And this is just one level of understanding the numbers. Now then there comes the next level, which is about the core journalism part of it, holding governments to account. Like look at Telangana, for example. Last week Telangana's number of cases doubled within a week. Now why did that happen? Because there was a lot of public criticism that Telangana is not testing enough people. Now, journalists need to understand that, go to the testing data first. Now, imagine if India suddenly reports just 1,000 or 2,000 cases tomorrow. Are you just going to say that, oh, India is winning the battle against COVID? No. You're, as a data journalist, you are going to look into whether uh, India tested enough people. How transparent has the data been? In which states is it normal, which states is not normal? Like I will show you one example. Just sharing the screen. Yeah. So this is a graphic that the Hindu did a few days back. This is about how transparent has the data been for different states. Just a very simple example, like look at Uttar Pradesh. It has got no in all the columns, no regular bulletins, no data on cases and deaths, no data on samples tested. no patient demographics, no district level data. And then you have Tamil Nadu, and you have Karnataka, which have been reporting all this. And so this is just a simple example of how different states have been transparent at different levels in releasing their data, and understanding all that data is so important to understanding how the pandemic is developing. So in a large country like India, I think it was impossible to understand each state's fight against COVID without understanding the data. And even otherwise, like as Rangoli also mentioned about a master's project story, data is a crucial backbone for any story. Like even one that does not look like data journalism. Like imagine you want to report on a family which is not getting government benefits. Now, that family will be the starting point of your story, but then you need to extrapolate to the larger data set to see how really talk about the trends across the city, across the state, across the country. So yeah, that's what I feel, that this is just COVID times when suddenly everyone is thrown into data journalism, but even otherwise, it forms a crucial backbone for every story that we do. Have we lost Sangeeta?
Hi, Tanay. I'm really sorry.
Okay.
My computer crashed in the middle.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. I missed the last bit of what you said. But I hope everybody got to hear the relevance of data in the times of the pandemic. Should I move to the next question, Tanay and Rangoli?
Yeah.
Okay, now that we know the relevance of data, the next question is obviously going to be, how do we access good data sources, and how do we clean it up and analyze it? This is a question that both of you can answer. Who would like to go first? Rangoli?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. So sourcing a data is one of the three crucial parts to data journalism. So data journalism is basically divided into three parts. You source a data, you should know where to get the data from. Then you should know how to clean it. And to clean it, we need to learn basics of Excel, basics of, I don't want to throw in large programming names at you, but basics of R and Python are something that are crucial, and that is what I've realized in the last 1 year. Even I used to think, oh, Excel is enough, come on, it's just addition and subtraction, but it's much more than that. So and the third part is to analyze it and to bring it in a story form. So talking about the first part, there are three main places where you can get your data from. So the first is to basically download it from a government website, or from any other relevant reliable website that you think is good enough. So that data can be as big as, like I showed you, the census data. Just a second, I'll share my screen. Yeah, it can be as big as this, or it can be like a small data that you get on the pricing of vegetables and fruits from, say, agmark.net. The other interesting way to get the data is through scraping. So scraping is basically you write a code on Python and R, and you get whatever you see on the screen on a website, you can get it in an Excel form or a CSV form on your computer, and that will help you analyze. So this is something we did for Mint. So I'm sure we've all spent most of the time at Akka's, because Zomato would definitely not come to IIJNM. But then there are a lot of interesting places around Bangalore that we can look at. And so Zomato provides this API through which we can get the data on the cost per meal, on the number of reviews, the kind of food they serve, and a whole lot of things that you see on the app while you're ordering the food. So this is for Bangalore. We did this for 6 different cities, and you can see that how many places have what kind of food that they're serving. So that is an interesting way. The other way is the other website that we scraped was 99 acres to basically understand the rental status of different areas in one city. So the rents go from purple to dark orange, and obviously we know that Kengeri is cheaper to live than Whitefield, and Whitefield is cheaper to live in as compared to Indiranagar. So these are some of the very interesting data stories that we can do if we can scrape a website. The other the other interesting and very important way to scrape a website is by reading sources and just a second, by reading reports and by reading documents. That documents can be the annual reports of, say, a website, or an annual report of a government ministry, or it can just be monthly reports that the government releases. So I'll give you an example of what I did for one of my stories on India, how much the government is spending on the Indian infrastructure. So it it had I had to go through quarterly reports. Wait, can you see my screen?
No,
No,
Rangoli.
the screen has stopped sharing.
Okay, just a second. This was the report. It is a 1,000-page report on project implementation status, and I had to read 43 of these to basically get a sense of what the government is doing and how they're doing it. So that that is difficult, yes, but it is also the best way to collect data and source data and get the right information, because most of the journalists, tend to miss out on reading these important documents. So so this is what I came out up with. So my screen sharing is paused. My God.
It's probably your internet.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so
Yeah.
this is what I came up with. So as you can see that so as and when there is a positive number, positive increase, it's because there are new projects that are coming in, and the negative is because the older projects, the expense in the older projects has been there, but there are no new projects. So this led to this way we can see that the lowest was in late 2016, and we all know that is because of demonetization. And then there was this huge pump up here because there were elections in 2019, and most of the money that was spent was in the roads and road transport and highways. That's like the maximum they spent in. But this was not enough for my editor. So that's where analysis comes in. That's where reading of newspapers and talking to the experts comes in. Just looking at the data is not enough. So I spent 2 weeks reading all these reports. I spent 2 weeks getting all the data in place. But the only question my editor would ask me is, what are we trying to say, Rangoli? Okay, we've got this data. What are you trying to say? And he would just not accept me analyzing and saying that, this money has been pumped in because of the elections, or this money has gone down because of demonetization, because there was no solid proof to that. Nobody was saying it. So that's when I spoke with an expert in Ministry of Statistics, and he told me to look at the road ministry annual report, and there we found this. So as you can see that in most of the years, the length of the road constructed was half of what was actually awarded. But in the last year, when most of the money was spent in, the constructed road was double the length that was actually supposed to be made. So what were they actually trying to do? They were trying to uh, clean up all the older projects that they had done in order to gain traction and to show what the government has done. So when this was found is when I actually was able to write the story. So this is how sourcing and analyzing of data can be done. The other interesting story that Tane and I together worked on was I'll leave the visualization part to him, but this is the other story that Tane and I together worked on. So this is what the top 20 leaders of our country have been tweeting from the day um, the first COVID case was reported in China till May 25th, during when the first unlock period was happening. So getting 35,000 tweets in one Excel sheet from the API was just not enough. We didn't know what to do with it. It's just a lot, or you cannot read all the tweets and understand what they're trying to say. So to bring in the perspective, we had to basically break down it into three parts, three phases. The pre-lockdown phase from 1st of February, when the first case in India was reported, to the second lockdown 1 and 2, and then further on. So we found out that brought in the perspective of how the leaders were treating the pandemic, and it was found out that only 6 leaders out of 20 had started talking about COVID in February. The remaining had actually, including Narendra Modi, had started talking about it in late March, when the first Janta curfew happened. That's when people woke up, and that talks a lot about how we looked about at the pandemic and how we'll be treating it in treating it now. So getting data is available everywhere. Like any other story, data is available everywhere. You just have to look for it and look it at different angles to come up with a story.
Tana, you want to take over?
Rangoli has covered a lot of it, so I just want to add a couple of things. So yeah, the main thing is that data compared to 20 years ago, today you have all the tools available to your disposal to actually work on the data and analyze it, and to cover its full potential. Now, something that you can, and that story, by the way, the Twitter one, that was done by Rangoli and her team. I worked on it as an editor, but all the hard work was hers. So just one thing. So since Rangoli has already covered all the data sources that possibly are, and all of them need not be that complex and difficult to handle. You can always find much easier sources as well. But one thing that you can do if you want to explore data journalism a bit before you start your course is just go to a few of the data journalism websites, and when you look at their stories, try to just see what the sources are, like where they would have cited the data source, that is data from, say, National Family Health Survey, or data from census, data from any government portal. So just try to open those data sources for yourself and see how the data has been analyzed, and that would probably give you a good glimpse of how it works. Yeah, I'll keep it to that.
Okay, Tanay, thank you. Rangoli, the next question is to you. How do you turn data into a story? How do you bring in people and characters into the story?
So, like I said earlier, the best way to bring in characters is by reading and talking to people. So no matter how much data that you read, no matter how many sources you get, it's still very important to speak with people. It's very important to talk. Maybe what people might be saying is opposite to what you've been reading. So there's this story that I did. It was one of my first stories at How India Lives. was on that time. There was a huge hue and cry on how the doctors are not performing well in India, and the so many kids had died in Bihar due to a big disease. And so a lot of people were saying that the doctors are not efficient. And I spoke to a lot of patients whose family members had died, and they all said that they were careless, etc., etc. But when I started looking at the annual reports of AIMS and CMC Vellore, I found out that there weren't just enough doctors. uh, their annual report themselves itself said that the total doctors that have been hired are 19% less than what was actually sanctioned. And moreover, they were just overworked. I mean, imagine having 5,000 people coming to you every day and only 100 doctors to take care of them. And then I compared that with how the doctors, how many inpatients were coming in, outpatients were coming in every day in best hospitals in US and UK. And that was less than half of what was coming in the hospitals in India. So now what can you do in such case? So that's where your own analysis and both sides of the story come in. You have to showcase what other people are saying as well as showcase what the data is saying. So that's how you bring in um, characters and stories into the data.
Thank you, Rangoli. The last question is to Tanay. How do we, now that we've brought in people and characters into the story, how do we present it visually to the reader? What is the role of the desk or the editor in this process?
Yeah, so unlike the other forms of journalism, the one luxury that data journalism gives you of expressing yourself is two ways. One is through text and through infographics. Now, if you just use text to talk about data, that's going to be complex, and that's going to be very, very boring to read. And if you just give the infographics, then you will deny the reader the context and the background needed to truly understand the story. So both things are important, and to make sense of what's happening and why. So on a data journalism desk, the most important realization is this, that most people find data hard to understand, but in like instantly. And that could be because of a certain bias against data, or difficulty, discomfort with numbers, or sometimes because the data is actually very complex. But the moment they crack one part of it, the story actually becomes very easy to understand. And on the desk, that's that's the most important realization that you need while talking about data. Like just one example again from COVID, like the term flattening the curve. That's a perfect example of how data and stats, like who talks about curves and flattening curves in daily life. Those numbers could be difficult to understand immediately, but when we see the curve, we see what flattening means, and immediately it's so easy to understand why we need to flatten the curve, what flattening the curve means. That's the power of data. And this is your job as a data journalist, to especially on the desk, to give that push so that the reader can crack that data element, and then sail through your story. And also one thing, that realization that you may be dealing with data, but you are still not an academic or a researcher or a book writer. You're still the journalist. And even if the data is very, very complex, your primary job remains the same: communicate it as simply as possible. And that challenge is the beauty of data journalism for me: how to use simple language and creative data visualization to tell complex stories. And I think no other form of news reporting challenges your writing that much in that way. And how do you do that? In text, you need to explain your methodology very crisply in the text, and also by being able to imagine very accessible and simple visualization for your data. And by accessible, I mean something that is easy to understand quickly. It can be instant. It has to be instant and intuitive. If it's that, then it's the best thing. Like I'll give you examples of a very, very simple graphics From The Economist has an Instagram page where they do very frequent infographics, and they are very, very simple most of the times. So I'll just show you an example. Just give me a second. Is the screen visible?
Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
that Silicon Valley has
Yes.
a first to top. Yeah.
So this is a graph on the racism problem in Silicon Valley, in top tech companies. So the bluish part is the bottom part for all the tech companies is the white employees, the proportion of white employees. Then you have the Asian, then you have the Hispanic. The red one is black. Now this they have done for all four major companies, and within 2 seconds you know what this is trying to say. Like the red strip is so narrow, and the one for the whites is so big in all of them. And the moment you see it, you know that, oh, this is talking about how how all these companies have a diversity problem in their workforce. Now, so always there's this perception that the data is always complex, or you need to um, projecting or showing difficult data is difficult. But I'll show you one more example. Now this is another one from The Economist. So this shows that, so this is the map of Manhattan, average before the pandemic, Wednesday 2 p.m. how which parts of Manhattan have how much population. The darker colors show that these many people are there in that particular region or at Wednesday 2 p.m. on an average. And then you come to Monday 2 a.m. This is also before the pandemic. Monday 2 a.m. This is how it looks. Now you see the darkest parts are now the lightest. What does it show? That Monday 2 a.m. people are not there. So that would also be the case now, like during the lockdown. So this is to show how life could be if everyone starts working from home. Like Manhattan's total demographics would change. Now, in the first one I showed you, that this was about this used this kind of a chart. Then this one is using this map, and there is this third one, which could easily have been done through 3 lines of text, not even data. What does it say? American police kill around 1,000 a year, and each person that is who has been killed in the United States by a police officer 2013 to 19 has been represented by a dot. As simple as that, but this is so powerful. There are 7,663 dots in this graphic. And then you have at the bottom you have the number of police officers who were actually charged, which is 95. And look at these dots. So this could easily have been said in 3 to 5 lines of text, did not even need a graphic. But this is something where they have experimented with this thing. There's also this Wall Street Journal one which I wanted to show. So this shows basically how the introduction of a vaccine has reduced the number of cases for that particular disease. This is for measles. So you see the line, the vertical line just after 1960. That is the time when the vaccine was introduced. And the moment you see it, you know, like after the vaccine was introduced, the cases of measles have since the color is light, so that means very few cases in all states. Same for polio. So they did this thing for all major diseases and the impact of vaccines. So the reason for showing this is that to understand that we may be tempted to go with difficult to read and difficult to understand visualizations, but when you understand your story well, when you understand your analysis well, the visualization can be very lucid and it can be effective in that. Like you don't always need to go for fancy huge charts. Sometimes even just a simple bar chart will work, or a simple pie chart could also work. So your key takeaways should be clear, like what you want to show in your this graphic.
So no matter how complex the story, as long as you know what you're writing, you can make it as simple
Yes,
as you
correct.
want for the
Because
readers.
ultimately our jobs as journalists is that only to communicate it. It doesn't matter how complex it is.
Right. Uh, thank you, Tanay. We have about 4 questions here. I think we've answered Kritika's question, what can help us in analyzing and interpreting data effectively? So we'll move to Abhishek's. Abhishek's question is, what are the important tools one should learn for data journalism? Either Tanay or Rangoli, if you want to take that question. What are the tools that we should take to learn data journalism?
Rangoli, you want to go first?
Sure. So the tool is not to learn data journalism. The tool is actually to learn how to analyze and interpret the data. And there are some tools, basic tools like uh, Excel, R, and Python. They R is a statistical is a language statistical language which basically helps you analyze large set of data set. The other important thing to keep in mind is to know basics of basic concepts of economics like GDP and GNP and um, um, uh, bullish market. Not if we don't even look at the market, just basic economic factors concepts can help you analyze that. And then to learn to learn coding, you can go on various websites like there is Datacamp, there is Coursera. You can go on these websites and take up some online courses. And most of the data journalism that you learn is on the job. You basically take up, like any other story that you do, you take up a set of data and you see what they're trying to say.
We also have a very similar follow-up question, which is asking if any course or training needs to be taken before joining IIJNM to do data analysis, which I think I can address and tell you that I think you should follow what Rangoli said and read up on basics of economics. But we already have an elective of data journalism. You can take the learnings from this webinar and all the webinars to follow, but I don't think you need a specific training. What do you think, Tanay?
Basics of economics and something some comfort with numbers. Even if you don't have that right now, when you start actually start using the numbers regularly in your work, it will be helpful. And coding software like R and Python. So I personally don't know anything about them, and uh, I mean it's a good asset to have, but like if you have a good team to back you up, then there will be people who are strong, like I currently have at Mint. So like if I am good at something, the other person is good at something else, and so together we complement each other's skills. So like it's a good asset to have to know coding as well. But that can also come with time. And economics, yeah, economics and a bit of numbers, like even otherwise when you are working on stories at IIJNM, just think of looking at larger data sets to extrapolate your stories, and yeah, that will help.
Okay. Thank you, Tanay. We have a question from Shreya. How can we deal with situations where the official sources themselves are not willing to share data? Um, Say, she's given an example, say the PMO care funds, where there is PM care funds, where there is a plethora of transparency issues and government is refusing to make documents public. How do we deal with such situations?
You go into the typical the regular investigative journalism mode probably. And a lot of times you also have like the government data is the best, but a lot of times you also have other private sources which may not cover that the all the samples that the government data covers, but it's also helpful. Like currently, we don't have regular employment data from the government. So there's this organization called Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, and during the lockdown period, the data released by the CMIE has been very, very helpful in understanding how the employment scenario looks like. So yeah, that is a problem, and that will be a problem, like how a government tries to hide data, and they will always try to do that. And then you have to become an investigative journalist and probably go to the bureaucrats and who you have cultivated as your sources, and look for all the data that's hidden beneath hidden under their tables. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Ganguly,
in
do you want to?
addition, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. So in addition to that, you can basically track all the tweets that are there. So some people, most of the big people who have given the money have announced it on Twitter. So you can, even if the bureaucrats are not telling you anything, there are various ways like social media where you can go and track. As far as the trusting is concerned, um, in addition to just the government source, we also should look at the way the data has been collected. That is very important. So reading the footnotes, reading the methodology is what we spend most of our time in. That is where we basically convince, at least I convince myself that okay, this data is something that has so the method has been where they've taken enough sample size, and that represents different kinds of societies, and that is how I trust the data.
Oh,
Do
by
you
the way,
think?
that's a very good question coming from someone who was at Shreya.
Yeah.
So that's a very good question coming from someone who is yet to start a journalism course.
Do you think RTIs can be used also to collect data in the cases where offices are not
Yes, yes,
transparent?
of
Yeah.
course, yes.
Okay. The next question is from Piara. Can data be manipulated to shift the viewpoints of the masses?
Always, like, data is ultimately it's that's also part of the narrative, a narrative that you want to build, or the government wants to build, or so you'll see that often you think that there is a we often think that in the times when we don't agree upon even facts, data can help us sort that out. But that does not happen. Like, if even if you use data to show that a certain section of the certain section of the society thinks is probably wrong, they are not going to buy that, even if you give data for that. And they will say that your data is selective, and things like that. So that's always going to happen. And it's what matters is that your methodology is sound, your interpretation is sound. Like, a very let me give you a very wild example. Like, just during the coronavirus, like, if there is a survey, that if there is a data point that says that during this period, crimes reduced, and the conclusion is that coronavirus reduces crimes. Now, that's no one is going to say that, but just giving an example of how you need to understand the cause of a cause and correlation of what you are trying to conclude. Like, if you say the crimes reduce because of the lockdown, that makes sense. But if you say coronavirus reduces crimes, that does not. So that's one thing about interpreting data also, which you need to keep in mind, that your interpretation, your methodology, your samples, the people you have talked to, all that is sound.
Okay.
So that will help in convincing the reader.
Right. Thank you, Tanay. There's, I think the connected question that Viransh has asked that you already touched upon on coronavirus cases and the numbers and data associated with it. He said it seems to be that there is a lot of miscommunication with regard to data, with numbers of COVID cases being added on the previous day. Do you think there's a miscommunication? Do you think it could have been done better?
I think that states can do a much better job at that. But we also need to understand that the government machinery is very, very pressed. right now. So there needs to be a balance between understanding their challenges as well as demanding the transparency that is required. Now, there are lots of states which are releasing regular data, and even no real-time data is not available. Regular data and their data from states and their data from districts all matches the total. Like if you see the Ministry of Health, the central government website, the data that they release. So they have all the states data in their table, and then there is a row that says number of cases yet to be assigned to states. Now, currently that's about 7,000, 8,000 cases, which you know that there are there in India, but you have not yet assigned to any state. So there is, I mean, there can be miscommunication, there can be a deliberate attempt at not being transparent, and some of it can also be just that they are very, very pressed right now. That does not mean that we should not we should stop demanding the transparency from state governments and the central government.
Yeah, and the other point is that sometimes they, I won't say try to hide, but they try to miscommunicate. So, like the states, some of the states, they know that their COVID cases have increased exponentially. So, they've divided the cases as positive cases and migrant cases. And so things like that happen, and that's where your consciousness and your sense to the subject helps and bring in the true picture.
Right. I think that also again answers Piara's question about how can data be manipulated to, change the viewpoints of the masses. You just have to be a little more discerning when you're looking at data or reading anything for that matter. And the last question is from Kritika. She's saying, what if there are different versions of the data that we collect? How do we know which data is to be relied on, which version is to be relied on?
So I'll tell you a basic example of that. According to census, India has some 640 districts, but according to RBI, there are some 700 districts. Two data sets by the government, two different governments talking about the same thing. But that's where it's important to go deep into the story and understand the point from which they're coming at. So census was created in 2011, but RBI updates the data on daily, monthly and quarterly basis, so it's more relevant, and that's how you rely on that's how you understand and rely at which data to rely on. The other point that I wanted to bring in was the big number that Nirmala Sitharaman released during COVID. They promised 2 lakh crore or 20 lakh crore investment or support by the government um, during the pandemic. But when we actually went and saw the budget reports, 20 lakh crore was the total amount that the government was expecting as receipts during this year. And most of the money that they were planning to spend was through credit. So that is how they manipulate, and that is why you have to read different reports and different papers to understand what the government is trying to say.
Thank you, Rangoli. Just to sum up, if students want to get ready to, or if they're interested to learn data journalism, both of you suggested getting familiar with Excel and basics of statistics and economics, average, percentage, and so on.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, both of you. I'm sure this has been quite an eye-opening session. It has dispelled certain myths and fears that we associate with data journalism. And I'm sure most of us will carry these lessons on to the electives and into IIJNM as we begin the course. Then I'll quickly tell you about the next session. It will be conducted by alumni Meghna Bhatt, who's an executive producer at Sony Sports, and Ritvik Mehta, who's a special correspondent at Hindustan Times. They'll be discussing the challenges of reporting and producing sports content in the times of no live sport due to COVID-19 pandemic, among other things. I'm sure that most of you will be there, and today's session has been very eye-opening. Thank you both, Rangoli and Tanay.
Thank you, Sangeeta.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you to the students for such good questions.
Yes, I'm giving you a feedback link in the chat like before. All of you, please provide your feedback, and I'll see you at the next session. Thank you both, Rangoli and Tanay, and
Okay.
everybody else.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.